you talk about being overwhelmed and being an overachiever. Like, I fell into that same thing where I was, getting straight A's. I was in the clubs. I was applying to go on these mission trips. I was tutoring peers and friends, and I was a 2-sport, because it was volleyball and basketball, and then there was spring volleyball. But I also very quickly took that on, and that's been something that I've had to unlearn. As I've matured and grown.
That's always fascinating to me, are these generational patterns and the way that we learn from the older generation, but then also the younger generation as a way of teaching us too.
Absolutely.
But what are some of those things, like in the process when you say unlearn, what are some of the positives of the things that you took from your mom, and then what are you unlearning?
Well, I think one of the biggest things for my mom and what I've learned is like how to truly like be there for other people, and that you can do a lot as long as you're just like you plan appropriately and you have that. But I quickly learned as an adult, in my early to mid 20s, that like almost all the things that I planned like quickly went out the window. And so for me, there was like some inherent like, I don't want this feeling of planning everything and then it not going and then having to pivot or have a bad attitude or the whole plans are ruined because what you thought, right, your expectation versus reality wasn't right. And so for me, like I actually course corrected complete opposite, to where even my siblings at sometimes would be frustrated as an adult, like that I wasn't as much of a planner as I was before. I'm like, no, I can really go with the flow now. Like I have ideas of what I want to do, but it doesn't need to be A, B, C, D, E. It can be A, F, C, Z. And so that's like something I've even been trying to teach her is like, as we talk about things that go on in our life, I said, Mom, like, why are you getting so frustrated because the doctor took an extra 30 minutes and asked you the same question 3 times? Like, I understand that's inefficient and I understand that's frustrating, but is it worth ruining your whole day to have that frustration be like in you? And so, go ahead.
So what's it feel like when she gives you that kind of advice?
I receive it. I receive anything that she says to me, okay? I let it sit, resonate, and then move forward with it. It's really hard to have done something for so long and then now realize, okay, maybe I was a little too intense. It was a lot intense.
You mean you didn't have to yell at the McDonald's person because there's ketchup and mustard on the burger?
They
But a lot of
hold me accountable for my behavior when it comes to the expectations of paying for food and getting what I paid for. My expectation is that I've ordered something and that you all are making money to make my food and that it should be right.
Yeah. And
I should have everything in the bag, and so that's a work in progress.
Well, do you what I've learned a lot about our nervous systems, right? And the place that we are, where we're functioning from, and the story that our body is telling us pretty much all the time in any given situation. In parenting, it can be very heightened because we're trying to keep little ones alive, to plan. I mean, there are reasons. It's a lot, and I lived in that a lot because my youngest was a runner, and he did a lot of things that were not safe, and I was on all the time. And so coming down from that, I've learned a lot about how to re-regulate, and then when you start to do that, how the world looks a little bit different. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, and just a little side note to that, my son was like this close to having a leash on him everywhere we went, so I can relate to that.
Yeah.
And at some point, I thought he was I thought he maybe had been borderline autistic or Asperger's, because we had some behavior problems, but his behavior problems were a direct result of his parents' relationship and everything that came after that. Okay. So that wasn't the issue. It was more of
Well, that goes back to that impact that we have on them, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when your youngest, how old was your youngest? And you've been through a divorce.
Yes. Yeah.
And how old were these guys?
So the divorce was final in 2007. So the 2006 is when things really got ugly, so to speak. And so James was 7 or 8. Yeah, he was young and loved both of. Well, they all loved both of us.
Of course, yeah.
But he had a special connection with his dad, and so that whole separation and thing,
and that's where you were noticing a lot of the behavior problems.
Yeah. So I just, with him specifically, I would just be really transparent with the teachers, and if we had a bad morning, I'm like, hey, this is what happened this morning, go from there. And most of his teachers were pretty accommodating. They really understood. His fourth grade and fifth grade were really rough years. And but after that, I did get him involved with Boy Scouts because I wanted him to have an outside activity, not just sports. Because he was playing baseball one year and he was having attitudes on the field, and I'm like, I've been a coach, all my kids have been athletes. I am not going to be the parent who lets their kid stand in the middle of center field and have an attitude and bring the team down. Not going to happen. And I went to the coach, I'm so sorry you have to do this, but I'm going to pull him from the team because I don't think it's fair to the other players for his behavior to hold the whole team back.
How did the coach react to that?
To be honest, I don't remember. I think I was more worried about what I looked like with my kid on the field acting like an animal and not being able to reel that in and be productive. And so that was a decision I made, and whether good or bad, it hindered him from playing ball in high school, which was really sad because he's a good athlete, has the right body build and really could pick up any sport and do well. And but I kept him, ironically, you're like, at that time I was like, do I want to do this, do I not want to do this? But putting him in Boy Scouts, he ended up becoming an Eagle Scout.
Wow, that's not easy to do.
And then he's now working as a district executive in Ohio for the Boy Scouts of America. So I think I made the right choice. I think that was a decision. And really for him, the conversation, it was more about the conversation I had with him about his behavior. I'm like, no, we're not going to act like that on the ball field. And until you can improve your attitude and be a part of the team, you're not playing ball. 2 years I did that. Didn't let him play.
Yeah. So how did his behavior over the time, and really with all of them, making a divorce and making a decision to get divorced is a huge, it's such a struggle. It's so hard.
It's hard.
What were your feelings at the time with what your kids were going through, and how were you able to work through that with them?
Their dad and I were both hurting,
and
we could not get on the same page. There were some things that we were on point with, or we would have never got married, right? But there was some things that we just could not work through, and the divorce was a self-preservation. And I went to counseling and a therapist, and I'm like, hey, I need to lay this out on the table and find out if my head is in the right place, because I don't want this to be, it needs to be for me, but also needs to be for my kids. And we were at the point where we were literally arguing every day, 3 to 4 hours, no joke. Physically and mentally exhausting. It just was not a good spot. And speaking of that generational thing, I had parents that were divorced. He had parents that were divorced. I mean, like, we came together as young adults and we're like, we don't want our kids to go through that. We had that conversation, but we failed to communicate effectively with each other to get past those hurdles.
The hard stuff. Yeah.
And it is what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and there's a lot of maturity from 19 to how, you know, you were married for how many years?
We almost 20.
Yeah.
Almost
Same.
20 years. So I was 39-ish when it all went down. And what was it? 39? Is that right? Yeah.
The year I went to college was when you guys sat us down and said you were going to split up, and then I think it was another year or two before the divorce was finalized.
It was a year. Yeah.
What do you remember as being like really pivotal for you?
I remember them fighting all the time. I remember like hearing arguments from anywhere, like the house, the kitchen, or their room, the kitchen.
And like how do you remember what your body and your mind felt like when you'd hear that?
No, but I remember the day that they sat us down and told all of us siblings that they were going to separate. And I just remember you guys telling us, and my feeling kind of being like, okay, I kind of saw this coming. But then also in that conversation, they started kind of bickering in front of us. And I remember getting up and kind of being like, we get it, you don't need to argue anymore, kind of deal. And then like I walked out of the room. I don't remember if it was angrily walked out or if I just walked out, but I remember it kind of being like, okay, like what's next? But I was also getting ready to go to college. So I left the house and I knew most of what was going on. But like the thing with like looking back now, I can see both sides. I can see why they tried to stick it out for 20 years and why it took so long, but I can also see the liberation and how people started to get better, whether it was, you know, a year or longer for people to find some sort of like grounding, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it was like, I remember being at college and getting two sides to every story. And then having a distinct understanding that neither of them were wrong, but neither of them were 100% right and truthful.
Skewed, right? It's always going to be skewed.
Right? So then me taking the middle road and saying like, okay, like I can see both sides and I feel where both of them are at. Like I'm very much like my mother.
Yes.
But I feel emotions like my dad. So I can see, and I knew that neither of them really meant to hurt the other, but the lack of communication was something that I knew inherently early. And that's like where my relationships and the importance that I put now, communication is so important to me. And even if I have to say something and get it off my chest that's going to piss somebody off, like, and I usually know when that's going to happen, but I'll still say it. And I'll say it as nice as I can if I know it's going to elicit something negative back. But then people know where I'm at. And then we can either engage because you know where I'm at and you can want to, or that's a sign that it's no longer going to be a fit or that I shouldn't explore this relationship any longer because that communication piece isn't there. So like, whereas they weren't great examples in everything that they did in their marriage or their divorce, like there were lessons that were learned out of it that I know that I do want to do or not want to do, right? And when you're questioning divorce, like, or staying together for the kids, like that's such a fine balance. But what she said as far as like thinking about herself but also the kids, that was also very apparent too. I just wasn't in the house having to deal with, you know, and we've talked about this, like I can see a difference in the way that I've become as an adult, being the only kid that had both parents in the household till I left, versus the other four, and different levels too, as I look back. So I think, just reiterating that communication is so important. And even then you can communicate what you need or what you don't need you know, or hey, I need to take some time or whatever, and that person, like, if they truly love you and it's meant to be, like, they will give you that space.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If
But
they're in a place,
but you need to communicate that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's huge.